Oh, what a wonderful day! I guarantee that most of you will be saying that after you've seen this movie. Now on with the show! Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. In this video we are returning to the dystopian future to take a look at the highly anticipated sequel, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Released in 2024, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes takes place years after the reign of Caesar, where a young ape goes on a journey that will lead him to question everything he's been taught about the past and make choices that will define a future for apes and humans alike. This time directed by Wes Ball and written by Josh Friedman, the movie stars Owen Teague, Freya Allen, Kevin Durant, Peter Macon, Linda Peckham, William H. Macy, Eka Darville and Travis Jeffrey. I love the Planet of the Apes prequel movies with Andy Serkis. Honestly, I would go so far as to say that I think that is one of the greatest movie trilogies that has ever been made. But when it comes to the original movies, I've only ever seen the first one with Charlton Heston, and I've seen the 2001 remake from Tim Burton as well. I haven't seen any of the others outside of a few clips here and there. I am definitely going to have to check those other ones out one day. But even so, because of my feelings towards the prequel films, I would consider myself to be a fan of this franchise. So when this movie was first announced, I was quite curious to see what it was that they would do. Not that I wasn't excited about the prospect of getting more installments in the Planet of the Apes movie set within this continuity or anything like that, but I wasn't quite sure what else they could really do with it. And I'll be honest, in the back of my mind there was a little bit of me that was thinking that the only reason that we were even getting this movie in the first place was purely because Walt Disney Studios had recently acquired 20th Century Fox and they wanted to try and get this franchise back up and running again. To be fair, Prey was amazing, and so far Alien Romulus looks really good too. So I was cautiously optimistic about this. And then the trailers were released and I was genuinely a lot more interested in seeing where it was that they were going to be taking this franchise and what it was that they were actually going to do within the film itself. So I decided to go and check this out. And while I wouldn't personally say that it is as good as the Matt Reeves movies, I do think that it is on par with Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So needless to say, I was pleasantly surprised by this movie, and it is much better than expected. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is set generations after the events of War for the Planet of the Apes, where the apes are now the dominant species on Earth, and the dwindling human population are now feral mutes. The movie follows a character called Noah, a chimpanzee from a falconry-oriented clan, as he sets out for revenge and freedom after tragedy strikes his home. This leads him to a new clan led by a self-proclaimed ape king called Proxima Caesar, and a young human woman who holds the key to Proximus's quest. Compared to the previous movies, this one is a little bit more straightforward and not quite as complex. It has a lot of beats from classic hero's journey stories, it has a few elements from coming of age stories, and it's all mixed in with the story about revenge. And it's done really well. Like the previous films, it's very character driven, with their emotions and choices having an impact on the overall outcome. One of the most interesting parts about this movie, and one of the most unique aspects about this installment, is the way that it tackles the aftermath of Caesar's reign. It's not a direct continuation by any means, it is set years after those movies concluded. It is pretty much its own thing, which I do think is aided by a very different atmosphere and visual look that this movie has gone for. So I do think that you could theoretically go into this movie with no prior knowledge whatsoever about the previous three movies. But it does still have a few connections here and there, and it does honour what has come before it. So I do think that for fans, I think that they will get a little bit more out of this. The biggest of which is how what Caesar did in the previous three movies has impacted and shaped the world that the apes live in at this point in their timeline, and how his words, how what he's been saying over the course of those movies is being perceived by the apes that are living at this point in the timeline. Because Kingdom is set so many years after the events of War for the Planet of the Apes, it does mean that all the apes have to go on when it comes to Caesar and their knowledge of him is just his words. And the apes have very different ways of perceiving what it is that he actually said, with some of them perceiving it to be one way and then others are perceiving his words in a very different way. I think that is a really interesting idea and concept to explore with these movies, and I do like how it is handled, and I do think that they do handle it very well with the way that all these characters do have their own different ideas and perceptions on what it is that has happened in the past and how they perceive all the wording and things like that, and their mindsets towards it as well. I think that stuff is really good. They do quite a lot of it, and I do think that it is integrated into the movie very well. I will admit, I do think that there is a lack of tension in this movie. Not that there isn't any tension in this movie whatsoever. I think that the action sequences, the fights, the chases, there's plenty of tension in all of those. I mean, it's directed by the same guy who directed the Maze Runner movie, so of course it's going to have some very tense moments. And they're very well staged as well. It's more when it comes to Proxima Caesar and his goal, there is a lack of urgency surrounding what he's after. Partly because you're not entirely sure what it is that he's actually after until it's revealed. and partly because it is introduced quite late on. I think that having that stuff being addressed a little bit earlier on in the movie, or brought up a little bit earlier on, and having it being built up over the course of the movie would have helped a little bit more, because I do think that it would have helped actually highlight the dangers surrounding what it is that Proximus is after a little bit more. And I will say, and this is something that a lot of other reviewers have mentioned as well on their reviews, I do think that the overall pacing of the movie is a little bit slow. The movie with credits is 2 hours 25 minutes long, so it's about 2 hours 15 thereabouts. And I do think that this is one of those movies where you do kind of feel that length. And normally in this kind of a situation, I would be saying, oh, maybe you could cut this, or just trim this, or just edit this out, or change this, or tweak this, or do this and this and that. I can't really say that for this one, because pretty much everything that happens in this film is pretty important. So despite the fact that I would say that the overall pace of this movie is quite slow, I do think that it does earn the runtime. I do think that it does make full use of the amount of time that it does actually have. And I do think that compared to a lot of other movies that we have had quite recently as well, I'm happy that this is a movie that doesn't just unnecessarily go overboard and just drag things out for as long as possible. So I wouldn't really say that it's a negative, but I could see it being a problem for others. Now, I said that this movie is 2 hours 25 minutes with credits, but according to the director, there's actually around 30 to 40 minutes of deleted scenes. So potentially those scenes could actually help fix the pacing problems, and I do think that they could potentially add to the tension as well. We'll see, but I've got to admit, overall, I am really, really happy with the direction that they have gone with this movie, the stuff that they get up to, the stuff that they address and bring up. It is brilliant, and I am really, really glad that they actually did go in this direction. And one thing that I am really happy with about this movie is the fact that it does prioritise the characters. It's a very character-driven story, as I said, but more specifically, it is about a character called Noah. Noah is, without a doubt, the main protagonist here, as he features in at least 95% of the film, with events being shown through his perspective. He is played fantastically by Owen Teague, who delivers a great performance. Noah, along with his friends Laika and Anaya, played by Francis Berry and Travis Jeffrey, is a very engaging character and established very well. He's likeable, he's complex enough to be compelling, you do empathise with him, and I think the way he develops across the movie, from the performance to how the story evolves, is excellent and feels natural. Yes, it is stuff that has been done many times over the years, the coming of age story, the hero's journey, all that stuff, but it is executed really well, and Noah is a likeable enough character that you are rooting for him, and you do want to see him succeed in his quest. I really like the character overall. I think that what they do with him and his friends is great. I think that we could have seen a little bit more of his friends here and there. They are kind of off screen for a large section of the movie, but I do think that when they are together, it is great, and they do have a great relationship between them. And I'm also really curious to see what it is that Noah might get up to if he does return in future installments. I definitely think that we are going to be getting more Planet of the Apes related content in the very near future, and if they're able to maintain the quality that these past few movies have, then I am all on board with it. I am so looking forward to seeing what it is that they can do in the future. And speaking of the apes and evolving elements, that was something that I was quite curious to see in this movie, and that's how the apes have changed and evolved since the last movie. The apes, I feel, are more human than ever in this one, with more of them talking much more fluently and not grunting as much. They still occasionally use sign language here and there, including when they're trying to be stealthy, and I like that that's been kept. The evolution of the apes has been a very subtle and interesting aspect of these films, and in this one, you really do see just how far that they've come. Even though this movie is populated by a load of brand new characters who have never appeared in this franchise before, it is handled very well, and you do feel that change. And one of the new characters that's introduced in this movie is an orangutan called Raka, played by Peter Macon. He is my favourite character in this movie. He is instantly likeable, and I love what he brings to the film. The performance is excellent from Peter, and he is surprisingly quite funny as well. He's not a comedy character before anybody asks, but he does add a little bit of levity to the movie. It is quite a serious movie overall, so it is nice having a character that does add a little bit of levity to the situation. It's quite similar to what it is that they do with Bad Ape in War for the Planet of the Apes, but I feel like Bad Ape was a little bit more cartoonish in some areas, but he was still very funny. I think the Raka is a little bit more serious, but I do think that he does still add a good amount of levity to the film. And at the same time, his presence does add some important elements and some much needed context surrounding this era of the Planet of the Apes. And I like that he is a character that does add a challenge to Noah's view and knowledge of the world. And that includes Noah's perception of humans, or echoes as they're called in this film. At this point in time in the Planet of the Apes timeline, humanity has continued to devolve into the feral mutes that they were during the original films. So I was curious what they were going to do with Freya Allan's character called May, and without going into spoilers, I thought that what they do with her is really good overall, if a little predictable. Her story and how it fits into the overall narrative is very well handled, and I do like how that's woven into Noah's plot. I don't think it was a necessary plot to add into the movie. Noah's story alone is pretty great, but it does add another layer and it helps lay the foundations for what will potentially happen in the future. Plus, considering that Freya Allan is basically playing the only human character with a sizable role in this movie and all of her co-stars are in mocap suits, I do think that she does a fantastic job overall, and she delivers a great performance. I've got to admit, I wasn't used to seeing Freya Allan with dark hair. I'm so used to seeing how she looks in The Witcher that when I saw her in the first trailer, I actually didn't recognise her. I know a few people who've said the same, to be honest. Anyway, I really liked her overall. I think the character was really good. I think that Freya Allan's performance is really good. I like how she connects to the main story, and I like how she factors in to Proximus's ultimate goal. Proximus Caesar is the latest antagonist to appear in this series, and he is excellent. He is very intimidating with a brilliant on-screen presence, and he is surprisingly quite scary in terms of both voice and overall design in a few scenes. He's played fantastically by Kevin Durant, who, I will be completely honest, I didn't know it was him, and I was pleasantly surprised when I found that out. Proximus is an excellent addition to the gallery of antagonists in the Planet of the Apes prequels with a clear and understandable motivation. The biggest, and to be fair, the only negative that I really have towards this character is his overall screen time. Proximus is built up across the course of this movie, so there is a bit of a build up towards actually meeting him. But in terms of actual screen time, actually him appearing on screen, there's very little of him. He doesn't appear until quite a way through this movie, so I don't think that there's really enough time to establish a rivalry between him and Noah in the same way that they do with a character called Silver, played by Eka Darville. Even though I would say that the confrontation between Noah and Proximus is pretty decent. It is disappointing how much screen time he actually does have and how much he actually does appear in this movie, considering how prominent he is in all the marketing. So I do think that they could have done a little bit more with him. Again, maybe that's what the deleted scenes will help fix. He is great overall. Kevin Durant's performance is excellent, and that does extend to every single performer that does appear in this movie, in and out of mocap. I think we need to talk about the motion capture in this one. The motion capture work in the Planet of the Apes movies, more specifically what they did with Caesar, is a benchmark when it comes to motion capture performances. For me, Caesar is up there with characters like Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So I was very cautious and curious about how good it was that the apes were actually going to look in this movie, especially since a lot of big budget movies quite recently have had either very lackluster or just straight up bad CG and effects. Again, to repeat myself on every single time that I've brought this up, it is not because of the artists. And I've got to be honest, when it comes to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I was absolutely blown away by the work that has gone into this movie and how good the characters look. The characters in this movie look phenomenal. They are expressive, they are believably emotive, and they look incredible. It's even better seeing how much of the film was actually shot on location too, so the way that the characters interact and move through their surroundings is very realistic, which is a far cry from what they did with Rise of the Planet of the Apes. How this technology has advanced is absolutely incredible, and all the stuff that we are now able to do, from locations, from sets to characters and all that, even though it can absolutely be used excessively in a number of different movies and TV shows, it is honestly amazing. I've actually heard reports that apparently when this movie gets released on Blu-ray and 4K and whatever other home releases it gets released on, that they are actually going to release a version of the movie that you can watch where you're going to be actually able to see the actors wearing the mocap suits. That actually does sound really cool, and it is something that I am genuinely really interested in seeing. So I hope that rumour's true. How the apes look in this movie is absolutely incredible. There are some shots in this movie, some close-up shots of the apes, that I was convinced, like especially like hands and all sorts, that I was convinced that they were wearing gloves or prosthetics or just like fur on their arms or everything, just the way that it interacts with light and the way that it casts shadows and everything. It's just mind-blowing what they've been able to do with this movie. There's one scene especially where there's a character that's been covered in like ash or dust, and he looks so realistic. The apes in this movie look absolutely phenomenal, and I would honestly say that the work that has gone into this movie rivals what it is that they did with War for the Planet of the Apes. Now that is high praise. The effects in general in this movie look absolutely fantastic, from the backgrounds to the water effects, the scenery, it all looks incredible. I will say there are a few moments here and there where I do think that the effects are a tad noticeable, but they are very few and far between. Everything looks fantastic in this movie, and the detail that's gone into everything that you see in this film, it really does help blur the line between what's real and what isn't. And I'll even go so far as to say that the effects and the CG that is featured in this movie is some of the best that I have seen in a good while. So as you can probably tell, I was quite happy with it overall. And finally, the soundtrack from composer John Pisano is really good overall. I don't know if I would go so far as to say that it's as strong as some of the previous soundtracks that we have heard from the Planet of the Apes movies, but I do like how it does continue to mix together that classical film score that you have heard in the previous movies and that primal drum beat as well. It's subtle when it needs to be, it's tense when it needs to be, and I like how it swells into something a lot more epic when some of the more dramatic stuff happens. Plus, I really like how the soundtrack actually reflects where this movie takes place within the Planet of the Apes timeline between the Andy Serkis movies and the Charlton Heston movies, because this does feature a few snippets of soundtrack from both eras of this franchise. They're really sneakily woven in here and there, and I like how they are used. It is a really good soundtrack overall, and it is effective. Overall, this is a fantastic entry to the franchise and a genuinely great film all round. Everything from the performances, the motion capture work, the effects, the immersive sound design, the editing, the soundtrack and cinematography are excellent overall, with some decent characters and a simple yet engaging story. Yes, a lot of this has been done before, but it is handled very well and it does feel fresh enough. I do think that some of the characters aren't given enough screen time, and I also think that the pacing can be quite slow, so I could see some people maybe finding this movie a little bit boring. But even so, there is a lot to like, and I would say that this is absolutely worth checking out. It is a 100% must watch for fans, but to everyone else, I would heavily recommend seeing this movie full stop. This movie does not require any in-depth knowledge around this franchise whatsoever. This is pretty much its own thing, so I do think that you can go into this movie and not know much about the franchise. But at the same time, I do think that fans may get a little bit more out of it. I really enjoyed this movie. It's a strong addition to the Planet of the Apes series, and I can't wait to see where this franchise goes next. So with all that being said, my rating for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is an 8 out of 10. What a wonderful day indeed. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and which movie in the franchise is your favourite. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See you guys.